This is the final presentation on the Constitutional Convention. We will focus entirely on the ratification of the Constitution, or the states agreeing to accept this as their new government. As you can imagine, this is not an easy process, and there will be some negotiating and trying to win over the people that are hesitant to adopt it. The things that we need to know from our AP framework is that the delegates who participated in the Constitutional Convention created a limited but dynamic central government embodying federalism and providing for a separation of powers between its three branches. We already talked about that, but I like that language, especially a dynamic central government, and so I really wanted just to review it real quick. When the Constitution was complete, they needed all the states to approve it, and they really only needed 9 of the 13, and they got them pretty easily. The problem is some of the larger states were still holding out, like Virginia and New York. And one of the big issues in regard to the Constitution were some of its deficiencies. So as you look at the slide, a Federalist supported the Constitution. A Federalist would have been Washington, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, Benjamin Franklin. An anti-federalist was against the Constitution. They believed that it wasn't the best solution. In particular, their key concern was that it didn't protect individual rights. Every state, or most of the states, had a Bill of Rights within their state constitutions, and it was a list of rights that protected individual rights of the people. And there was a fear of the anti-federalists that when you created a large central government, then your individual rights would be violated. So this is what was kind of holding many people from supporting it. There's an attempt by 3 men to sway the people of New York to support the Constitution. And Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison wrote 85 papers known as the Federalist Papers in an attempt to persuade the people to support the Constitution. And this is a pretty important part of this time period because they were highly influential papers. So we left off talking about the key concerns of the Anti-Federalists, really wanting to make sure that individual rights were protected. They get enough states to ratify the Constitution, so they move forward. And one of the early changes that they make is adding this Bill of Rights to kind of keep the Anti-Federalists happy. And a Bill of Rights is a list of individual rights. And our Bill of Rights is modeled really heavily off of the Bill of Rights written by George Mason in Virginia. And they contain 10 amendments. Anytime that we fix our Constitution or add to it, it's an amendment. When we add to it, we call it an amendment. So we amended it 10 times right off the bat, and we call the first 10 amendments the Bill of Rights. The famous one is obviously the First Amendment, which we abbreviate as RAPS, R-A-P-P-S, freedom of religion, assembly, press, petition, and speech. Most people know the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, and there's others that protect us against unreasonable search and seizure, so going places, going into your private property without a proper warrant, a right to a trial by a jury, a cruel and unusual punishment if you are found guilty of a crime. These are things that we find in our Bill of Rights, okay? And we're going to continue to add to our amendments as the school year goes on. On this slide, you'll find some of the key concepts from our AP framework. We know that in the Constitutional Convention, the delegates negotiated, they collaborated, they compromised to work together. They also will compromise over the issue of representation in regards to slave states. We know that the solution to this is the 3/5 compromise, and also ending the international slave trade. And then the last bullet is what we just talked about, was the difference between the Anti-Federalist and the Federalist, and how the Federalists supported the Constitution, and a handful of key Federalists will write a series of essays known as the Federalist Papers. You can see in our standards here that the terms Anti-Federalist, Federalist, Alexander Hamilton's, James Madison, Bill of Rights are all explicitly listed. That means that we have to know those and that you could be tested upon them. Our final slide looks at the learning objective for this time period. I always like to share these with you because they make great possible AP essay questions. So we want to be able to explain the continuities and changes in the structure and functions of the government with a ratification of the Constitution. So a continuity would be something that had stayed the same and didn't change. So, for instance, like fearing a strong, powerful executive branch, and then also like the changes, like what has changed the process from the Articles to the Constitution. For instance, the Articles gave the states a lot of power, and the Constitution kind of calmed that down a little bit. So, we'll continue to kind of talk about this skill, but I always like to show these to you.